Imagine tomorrow you lose your job, end a relationship, and receive worrying medical news, all on the same day. How would you react? Most people would panic completely. But there's a very small group of individuals who would remain absolutely calm, not because they're insensitive, but because they master an ancient art that makes them mentally unshakable. Today you'll learn exactly how they do it. In this video, you'll discover the 10 practical teachings from history's greatest Stoic philosophers that can make you truly unperturbable in the face of any adversity. Let's go back to the previous example. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and lose your job. In the next few seconds, your mind will go through dozens of thoughts. Most of them will make you panic. But there's one specific thought that can save you from all this mental suffering, a thought that an enslaved Greek identified 2,000 years ago, and that changed not only his life, but redefined how humanity deals with adversity. Do you feel that tightness in your stomach when something goes out of your control? That feeling of being adrift when life catches you by surprise? It's not weakness, it's the human condition. But there's a way to cut this anxiety at the root. It starts with a distinction that most people never make consciously. Epictetus lived this revelation firsthand. Born enslaved in Rome, had his leg broken by his master, and spent years being treated as property. Anyone in this situation has reasons to surrender to despair. But it was precisely in this extreme condition that he found what his Roman masters, with all their wealth and power, could never achieve: a freedom that no chain could touch. The revelation happened when he realized there's only one dividing line separating mental peace from constant suffering, an invisible line that most people cross unconsciously dozens of times a day, creating their own mental prison. When you understand where this line is, you stop fighting ghosts. You stop wasting energy on battles you can't win. And more importantly, you start concentrating all your strength on the only territory where you have absolute power. This line isn't about external circumstances. It's not about luck, money, or connections. It's about a fundamental division that Epictetus identified by observing the difference between what made him miserable and what brought him peace, between what depended on him and what depended on the world, between his internal reactions and external situations, between his response and the stimulus. But here's what he understood that goes against everything we've been taught since childhood. Most of our suffering comes from trying to control exactly what's on the wrong side of this line. And when you identify where it is, you'll understand why you still feel imprisoned even having freedoms that Epictetus never had. This distinction isn't just philosophy. It's a practical tool that can be applied in the next difficult conversation you have, the next problem at work, the next time someone disrespects you. But before revealing exactly where this line is drawn, you need to understand that Epictetus didn't figure this out by reading books. He figured it out because his life depended on it. And maybe yours does too. There's an even more subtle characteristic he noticed about how our mind works, a characteristic that manifests in the first 3 seconds of any difficult situation. It determines whether you'll react with wisdom or panic completely. Have you ever noticed how some people seem imprisoned, even having all the freedom in the world? And how others radiate an inexplicable tranquility, even facing situations that would break anyone? This difference has nothing to do with external circumstances. It has to do with a perception that Epictetus developed in a condition most of us will never find ourselves in, a perception that teaches us exactly where the true prison of the human mind lies. Rome, 1st century. Epictetus was legal property of Epaphroditus, one of the most powerful men in the empire. He slept where they told him, ate what they gave him, went where they took him. His movements were controlled, his choices denied, his body didn't belong to him. Any normal definition of freedom would say he had none. But it was in this extreme situation that he made a revelation that would forever change the concept of human freedom. What happened was that Epictetus began to observe a strange contradiction. His master, Epaphroditus, theoretically free, lived tormented. He spent nights awake, worried about political conspiracies. He panicked when Emperor Nero showed displeasure. His mood changed according to news from the Roman Senate. Technically free, but mentally enslaved by 1,000 anxieties he couldn't control. Epictetus, the slave, began to perceive that there were 2 entirely different types of prison. The external prison, of which he was a victim, but which couldn't touch something inside him, and the internal prison, which he saw his master build for himself every day. A prison made of unmet expectations, need for approval, fear of losing status, emotional dependence on other people's behavior. That's when he understood something revolutionary. True slavery wasn't in physical chains, but in the mental dependence that people voluntarily created. It was in the need for things to happen in a certain way to feel good. It was in the fear of losing something external they considered essential for their happiness. It was in the inability to accept that reality doesn't always correspond to our desires. Epictetus understood that real freedom begins when you stop needing the world to be different from what it is for you to be at peace. When you understand that your tranquility doesn't depend on other people's behavior, the outcome of your efforts, or the circumstances you'll face tomorrow. That there's an inner territory where you have absolute sovereignty, even when everything around you is out of your control. This isn't passive resignation or conformism. It's recognizing where your true power lies. When he was finally freed from physical slavery, decades later, he had already freed himself from a much more subtle and dangerous slavery. The mental slavery that keeps billions of people imprisoned, even having all formal freedoms. Today you might be physically free but emotionally chained to others' opinions, professional recognition, the need for everything to go as planned. And maybe it's time to identify where these invisible chains are and how to break them using exactly the same method that Epictetus developed. But there's an even more subtle characteristic he noticed about how our mind works. A characteristic that manifests in the first 3 seconds of any difficult situation, and that determines whether you'll react with wisdom or panic completely. 3 seconds, that's how long your mind takes to decide if a situation is threatening or not. 3 seconds to form an impression that can determine whether you'll react with wisdom or explode in a response you'll regret later. And there's a very strange phenomenon that happens in these 3 seconds that most people never notice. A phenomenon that Epictetus identified by observing how the most experienced slaves managed to stay calm even in the most humiliating situations. Have you ever noticed how some people can hear criticism and remain calm, while others explode instantly? How some individuals face rejection and move on, while others ruminate for weeks? The difference isn't in the situation itself, it's in what happens in those first seconds before you even realize you're reacting. Epictetus spent years studying this phenomenon because his survival depended on it. A slave who reacted badly to orders could be beaten or killed. He needed to understand why some of his companions could maintain internal dignity even being publicly humiliated, while others broke mentally in just a few weeks. What he understood was that there's a specific moment between what happens to you and how you feel about it. A tiny space where your mind forms an automatic interpretation of events. And this interpretation, not the event itself, is what determines your emotional reaction. The revolutionary revelation was realizing that this initial interpretation can be questioned and modified before it turns into suffering. Imagine someone ignores you when you greet them. In the first 3 seconds, your mind automatically creates an explanation. Maybe it's "he doesn't like me," or "he's disrespecting me," or "I'm not important enough." This instant interpretation generates the corresponding emotion: anger, sadness, insecurity. But Epictetus identified that these interpretations are just that, interpretations, not facts. He developed a specific approach to intercept these initial impressions before they transformed into suffering, a way to create space between stimulus and response, between what happens and what you feel about what happens. This approach not only kept him mentally sane during years of slavery, but allowed him to become one of Rome's most respected philosophers. The approach works like this: the moment something bothers you, you stop and ask yourself a single question. A question that Epictetus used dozens of times a day, and that can totally change how you react to adversities. But first, you need to understand that these initial impressions aren't neutral. They come loaded with all your personal history, your fears, your insecurities. And when you learn to identify these impressions before they take over your mind, you gain access to a type of freedom that few human beings experience. But controlling initial impressions is only part of the equation. There's an even more powerful approach that history's most powerful emperor used when he felt he was losing perspective. An approach that can instantly change how you see any problem. Do this experiment now. Stop everything you're doing and imagine you're floating 100 meters high, looking down and observing your life as if it were a movie. See your house, your work, the people you live with. Now go higher. 1,000 meters, 10,000 meters. Keep going up until your entire city fits in the palm of your hand. Notice how your problems get smaller as you gain altitude. This isn't just a relaxation strategy. It's a specific method that the most powerful man in the ancient world used every morning to maintain mental sanity. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, master of a territory stretching from Scotland to Egypt, developed this practice because he understood something disturbing about absolute power. He understood that the higher you climb in human hierarchy, the easier it is to completely lose perspective on reality. Every day he woke up in golden palaces, surrounded by people who agreed with his every word. He had the power of life and death over millions of human beings. He could start wars or make peace with a nod of his head. And it was exactly this unlimited power that almost destroyed him mentally, because he realized that the human ego wasn't made to handle this magnitude of control without being completely corrupted. Marcus Aurelius began developing a specific strategy to combat the illusion of grandeur that power created in his mind. Every morning before facing the responsibilities of the empire, he forced himself to remember a fundamental truth that the ego tried to hide from him. The truth about the real size of human existence in relation to the cosmos, about the temporal insignificance of earthly glories, about the impermanence of everything that seemed solid and eternal. He wrote to himself, remembering that Rome had fallen before and would fall again, that previous emperors, as powerful as he was, were now just forgotten names in dusty books, that his own death was certain and near, and that all his imperial glory would be irrelevant 10 generations later. This wasn't depression or nihilism. It was strategic lucidity. The strategy worked because it restored proportion to daily problems. When you can see your current situation from a cosmic point of view, everyday anxieties lose their ability to dominate you. That discussion at work that kept you awake, that criticism that echoed in your head for days, that humiliation you can't forget. All these events change meaning when seen from the right perspective. Marcus Aurelius realized that the ego feeds on drama and artificial urgency, that our mind creates emotional storms because we lose sense of scale, because we treat temporary problems as if they were permanent, because we react to minor situations as if they were life or death matters. The cosmic perspective strategy doesn't solve problems, but reveals which ones really deserve your mental energy. Now go back to that initial experiment. Go even higher. Imagine you're seeing the entire Earth from afar, a tiny blue dot lost in infinite space. Your life is a microscopic fraction of this planet's history. And this planet is a microscopic fraction of the galaxy. This doesn't diminish your importance. It frees you from unnecessary weight you carry. But Marcus Aurelius understood that having cosmic perspective is only the first step. There's something more practical and urgent, a strategy he used not in the morning, but during the day's most tense situations, especially when he felt he was losing emotional control in the middle of a crisis. I'm going to tell you a truth that goes against everything you've been taught about success. The obsession with results is destroying you mentally. This need to see immediate return on every effort, to be recognized for every good deed, to be certain that your emotional investments will bear fruit. This isn't healthy ambition. It's a sophisticated form of mental torture that you apply to yourself every day. Marcus Aurelius realized this in the worst possible way. He spent 17 years trying to reform the Roman Empire. He created fairer laws, appointed honest administrators, tried to reduce the corruption that was eating Rome from within. And you know what the result was? Practically zero real change. The corrupt found new ways to circumvent the system. Politicians pretended to agree with him during the day and conspired against his reforms at night. The provinces continued being exploited. Soldiers continued looting conquered cities. Any normal person would have given up or become cynical. Any of us would be bitter seeing so much effort being wasted. But Marcus Aurelius did something entirely different, a change that saved not only his mental sanity, but redefined how he faced every action in his life. He stopped measuring the value of his actions by the results they produced and began measuring them by a totally different approach. The understanding happened when he realized he was suffering for a specific reason. He was conditioning his mental peace on the ability to control factors that were totally beyond his reach. The behavior of corrupt senators, the honesty of provincial governors, the gratitude of populations he tried to protect. He was, unconsciously, making his happiness depend on the cooperation of thousands of people he could never directly influence. That's when he developed what he called the circle of duty, an entirely new way to face any action or project. Instead of focusing on what would happen after the action, he learned to focus only on the quality of the action itself. Instead of asking, "Will this work out?" he began asking, "Am I doing this the best way possible with the resources I have now?" The difference is subtle but revolutionary. When you focus only on fulfilling your duty the best way possible, without getting attached to results, Two things happen simultaneously. First, you stop suffering in advance for things that may or may not happen. Second, paradoxically, you become more effective because all your energy is concentrated on execution, not anxiety about the future. Marcus Aurelius applied this to everything. In every Senate meeting, in every military decision, in every conversation with family, he did his part the best way possible and then completely released control over what would happen next. This isn't passivity or lack of ambition. It's a much smarter way to use your mental energy. Do you agree with this or think it's conformist talk? I want to see your argument in the comments. You're applying your energy in the most dispersed way possible when you try to control results that depend on external factors. And there's a specific strategy that Marcus Aurelius developed to break this destructive pattern. But before mastering this strategy during the day, you need to understand something even more fundamental. How you program your mind from the moment you wake up can determine whether you'll have mental strength to apply these ideas when pressure appears. How do you wake up? I'm not talking about the time or alarm clock. I'm talking about the mental state of the first 15 minutes of your day. Because there's a very strange phenomenon that happens the moment you emerge from sleep that can determine the emotional tone of the next 16 hours. And most people completely waste this window of opportunity, handing control of their mind to the first external stimulus that appears. Think about the last 7 days. How many mornings did you wake up and immediately pick up your phone? How many times did you start the day reacting to messages, news, or other people's problems before even defining internally how you wanted to feel? How many times did you get out of bed already anxious, already overwhelmed, already defeated before facing any real challenge? This isn't normal. It's a destructive pattern that modern life has normalized, but that's corroding your ability to have mastery over your own mental state. And Marcus Aurelius understood this 2,000 years ago when he developed a specific strategy for the first moments of the day that totally changed how he dealt with the pressures of absolute power. Every day Marcus Aurelius woke up knowing that thousands of people depended on his decisions, that military, political, and family problems would be waiting for him before he even left his room, that every choice he made could affect the lives of millions of Romans. The responsibility was overwhelming, and he realized that if he started the day reacting to this pressure, he would be dominated by it before even having breakfast. So he created a specific ritual for the first moments of wakefulness, a mental protocol that worked like a psychological vaccine against the day's chaos. He didn't start the day reading military reports or listening to senators' complaints. He started talking to himself, preparing his mind to face the adversities he knew would come. Marcus Aurelius wrote his morning reflections, but they weren't just random thoughts. It was a structured system of mental preparation that always followed the same sequence. First, he reminded himself of fundamental truths about human nature that helped him not be surprised by the malice, envy, or incompetence he would encounter during the day. Second, he reaffirmed his basic principles so as not to be influenced by external pressures. Third, he mentally visualized the challenges he might face and how he would react to them virtuously. This wasn't just philosophical reflection, it was practical mental training. Like an athlete who warms up before competing, Marcus Aurelius warmed up his mind before facing the empire's demands. He understood that the quality of his morning thoughts would determine the quality of his decisions throughout the day. The strategy worked because it created a solid internal foundation before being tested by the external world. Instead of starting the day reactive, he started proactive. Instead of allowing external events to dictate his mood, he first established the emotional tone he wanted to maintain, regardless of what happened. You can adapt this exact same protocol to your reality. You don't need to be Emperor of Rome to apply the morning mental discipline that Marcus Aurelius developed. But having a structured morning is only the first movement of a broader strategy. There's an even more powerful approach that another Stoic philosopher developed to prepare not just for the day, but for the tragedies that life inevitably brings. An approach that will seem totally insane at first sight. I'm going to propose something that will seem totally insane. I want you to dedicate 10 minutes of your day to imagine, in vivid detail, the worst things that could happen in your life: the death of someone you love, losing your job, a serious illness, an accident that would change everything. I want you to visualize these tragedies as if they were movies playing in your mind, feeling the emotional impact of each one. Your first reaction is probably repulsion. Why would I do this? Why would I attract negative energy? Why would I torture myself mentally unnecessarily? This resistance is understandable. Our culture teaches us to avoid negative thoughts, to think positive, to focus only on what we want to happen. But there's a fundamental problem with this approach that few notice. When you systematically avoid thinking about possible adversities, you become emotionally fragile in the face of them. Your mind develops such a great aversion to suffering that when it inevitably appears, you panic completely. Not because the tragedy is necessarily devastating, but because you never trained your ability to deal with it. Seneca realized this in the most brutal way possible. He was one of the richest and most powerful men in Rome, advisor to Emperor Nero, owner of a fortune that today would equal billions of dollars. He had everything our society considers absolute success. And yet he lived in a state of constant anxiety, not because his life was difficult, but because he was afraid it would become difficult. That's when he developed a strategy that seems contradictory, but that completely revolutionized his relationship with adversity. Instead of trying to avoid thoughts about possible tragedies, he intentionally embraced them. Every day he dedicated specific time to imagine scenarios where he would lose everything he had. His wealth confiscated by the emperor, his friends betraying him, his health deteriorating, his reputation being destroyed. This wasn't masochism or pessimism. It was military training for the mind. Seneca understood that emotional resilience isn't a natural gift. It's a skill that needs to be developed through practice. And you can't practice dealing with adversities only when they happen. You need to mentally rehearse before they become reality. The strategy worked because it removed the element of surprise from tragedies. When you've already imagined a difficult situation dozens of times, when you've already emotionally processed how you would react to it, when you've already developed mental tactics to face it, it loses much of its power to devastate you. Not because you become insensitive, but because you become prepared. Seneca called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. And he understood something surprising about this practice. When you stop mentally running from bad possibilities, you paradoxically become more capable of appreciating the good things you have now. Because you understand viscerally that they are temporary and precious. But there's an even deeper perception in this strategy, a perception that Seneca made about the relationship between fear and time that can totally change how you live the present. Because when you learn to deal with fear of the future, you understand something shocking about how you've wasted the only moment you really possess. And this is even more urgent than any mental preparation. Count how many hours you wasted yesterday. I'm not talking about moments of legitimate rest or conscious leisure. I'm talking about time that simply evaporated without you noticing. Infinite scrolling on social media, procrastination disguised as productivity, empty conversations that led nowhere, mental worries about situations you can't control. If you're honest, you'll probably identify that you lost half your day without even noticing. Now multiply this by 7 days. By a month, by a year, by a decade, you're experiencing in real time one of the most silent and devastating crimes that exist. The systematic theft of your own life. And the worst part is that you are simultaneously the victim and the criminal. You're stealing from yourself the only truly limited resource you possess, and doing it completely unconsciously. Seneca realized this at 60, when he finally woke up to a terrifying truth. He had spent decades accumulating wealth, political power, and social influence, but had wasted most of his life's time living automatically, chasing goals that others defined for him, worried about the future, dwelling on the past, rarely present in the only moment that really existed. The understanding was brutal. Seneca did the math and realized that, despite being over 60 years old, he had really lived perhaps 10 or 15 years consciously and intentionally. The rest had been wasted on anxieties, empty ambitions, superficial pleasures, and mainly on a strange illusion that time was infinite. That's when he wrote one of the most urgent letters in the history of philosophy. A letter addressed to his friend Lucilius, but that was actually a warning cry for anyone who still had time to change. The title was direct and frightening, On the Shortness of Life, and the central message was even more impactful. Life isn't short, we waste it. Seneca realized that most people live as if they were immortal. They postpone important conversations as if they had decades ahead. They leave doing what really matters as if time were a renewable resource. They spend mental energy on insignificant dramas as if they were life or death matters. And when they finally wake up to the reality of mortality, they identify that they spent their entire lives preparing to live, but never really lived. From this understanding, Seneca developed an entirely different relationship with time. He stopped treating it as an abundant resource and began treating it as the scarcest and most precious good he possessed. Every hour became a conscious investment, every day a unique opportunity that would never return, every present moment the only place where life really happens. He created a specific system to avoid temporal waste, a way to audit how he spent his hours that forced him to be brutally honest about where his life was really going. And he understood something liberating. When you stop wasting time on the unnecessary, there's enough time for everything that really matters. The strategy he developed was simple but revolutionary, and it can still be applied today by anyone who wants to stop being robbed by their own mental automatism. But mastering time is only part of a larger equation. There's an even more fundamental principle that the founder of Stoicism himself identified by observing how good people transform into corrupted versions of themselves. Have you ever watched Breaking Bad? Remember Walter White, respected chemistry teacher who transforms into the biggest methamphetamine dealer in the American Southwest. The entire series is about a man who gradually abandons his rational nature and allows himself to be dominated by primitive impulses. Greed, pride, anger, need for recognition. In the end, he destroys his family, kills innocent people, and dies alone, all because he lost the ability to act according to what he really was. This horrible transformation isn't fiction. It happens every day on a smaller scale with normal people. Maybe it's happening to you right now. You start making decisions based on momentary impulses instead of rational principles. You let anger dictate your words. You allow envy to influence your professional choices. You act out of fear instead of acting out of wisdom. And little by little, without realizing it, you become a corrupted version of who you really are. Zeno of Citium noticed this destructive pattern 2,300 years ago when he was observing human behavior at the port of Athens. He saw honest merchants becoming cheaters due to financial pressure. He saw upright politicians compromising their values for power. He saw good people making terrible choices because they lost contact with their own rational essence. The understanding that changed his life happened when he understood that there's a fundamental difference between reacting like an animal and responding like a human being. Animals are entirely dominated by instincts: hunger, fear, territory, reproduction. They have no choice about how to react to external stimuli, but human beings have a unique capacity that no other species possesses: the ability to filter impulses through reason before acting. The problem is that most people voluntarily abdicate this capacity. They choose to react like animals instead of responding like humans. And they do this because it's easier, faster, more automatic. Following impulses requires no mental effort. Following reason requires discipline, self-knowledge, courage to do what's right even when it's inconvenient. Zeno developed a simple but revolutionary principle to avoid this moral degradation. Before any important action, he asked himself a single question: is this according to my rational nature, or am I acting like a frightened animal? The question worked because it created a space between impulse and action, a moment of reflection that allowed him to consciously choose how to react. When Walter White started cooking methamphetamine, he said it was to leave money for his family. But if he had applied Zeno's principle, he would have realized he was lying to himself. He was acting out of wounded pride, not family love. He was following primitive impulses of territory and domination, not the rational nature that would make him truly human. You have similar impulses every day: impulses of revenge when someone disrespects you, impulses of greed when you see a dubious opportunity, impulses of cowardice when you need to confront a difficult situation. The question isn't to avoid these impulses, but to develop the ability to filter them through reason before transforming them into actions that will corrupt you gradually. And when you master this basic ability to live according to your rational nature, you're prepared to understand the most extreme example of moral integrity that history has ever recorded, an example that will force you to question how far you would be willing to go to not betray your own principles. Imagine you discovered something horrible about your boss. He's stealing from the company, manipulating documents, harming innocent people. You have two choices. First option: report him, do what's right, but probably lose your job and maybe never get work in the field again. Second option: stay quiet. Keep your salary, your stability, your comfortable life, but know you're being complicit in something morally wrong. Most people would choose the second option. They would justify saying they have families to support, that one person can't change the system, that it's not their responsibility to save the world, and technically these justifications make sense. They're rational, practical, understandable, But there's a deeply disturbing characteristic in this choice, a characteristic that corrodes the soul gradually. Cato the Younger faced exactly this dilemma, but on a scale 1,000 times larger. It was the year 46 BC. Julius Caesar had conquered Rome through a military coup. The Roman Republic, which had lasted for 5 centuries, was dead. The political system that Cato had dedicated his entire life to defending had been destroyed by an ambitious general who declared himself perpetual dictator. Caesar offered Cato an apparently generous choice. He could keep his position in the Senate, continue living comfortably in Rome, preserve his family and his wealth. The only condition was to implicitly accept the legitimacy of the new regime. He didn't need to publicly support Caesar. He just needed to stop opposing. He just needed to remain silent about the death of the Republic. For any rational person, the choice would be obvious. Cato was 60 years old. He had already fought the good fight. He had tried to save the Republic and failed. It wasn't his fault that the system had been corrupted. He could accept Caesar's offer, live his last years in peace, and leave for future generations the problem of restoring freedom. But Cato perceived a characteristic that others couldn't see. He realized that accepting this offer, however rational it seemed, would be a betrayal of everything he believed in. It would be admitting that principles can be negotiated when pressure increases. It would be teaching future generations that integrity has a price. It would be choosing personal comfort over moral truth. So he did something that shocked even his enemies. An attitude that Caesar never expected. An attitude that many people still today consider unnecessary, extreme, irrational. Cato chose to die rather than compromise his principles. Not in a glorious battle or dramatic gesture. He simply locked himself in his room, read a philosophy book about the immortality of the soul, and then killed himself with his own sword. Cato's suicide echoed throughout Western history, not because it was beautiful or romanticized, but because it represented a characteristic we rarely see: absolute integrity, the total refusal to negotiate fundamental values, even when the price of this refusal is life itself. You don't need to die for your principles, but you need to know what they are. You need to identify which values are negotiable and which aren't. You need to understand where you draw the line between what you accept and what you reject, even when that line costs you dearly. Which of these ideas challenged you most today? Comment here and let's discuss. When you integrate all these Stoic teachings, when you combine Epictetus's control with Marcus Aurelius's perspective, Seneca's preparation with Zeno's rationality and Cato's integrity, you become a very rare characteristic in the modern world. You become truly unperturbable. And to continue learning, click now on the video on screen. Knowledge is power.